President Trump toasted his closest ally among all European leaders, the president of France, at the Trump administration's first state dinner.
But it wasn't a day and night full of fun and games. There were serious talks between the two presidents on a very controversial world issue and no sign of agreement. KCON9 political reporter Bryan joins us now to explain that and the whole day that went down.
Yeah, there was plenty of celebration, even affection, but there was a tough issue that really was not settled by the end of the day. The issue of the day was the Iran nuclear agreement. President Trump has given strong indications that he wants to drop out of the three-year-old agreement next month. Also making news, the emerging bromance between Mr. Trump and the French president, and Melania Trump in the spotlight. And then there was that hat.
So tonight I ask that we raise our glasses as I offer this toast to President Macron and Brigitte, to the French delegation, and to every proud citizen of France.
President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron raised their glasses in a toast Tuesday night to the friendship and cooperation between their countries. It was the first official state dinner since Donald Trump became president 15 months ago, and it sparked a round of applause from the invited guests, including White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, National Security Advisor John Bolton, and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who will be celebrating his 95th birthday next month. But things weren't nearly so friendly and polite earlier when President Trump and President Macron sat down to talk about the Iran nuclear agreement, which Trump wants to dump and Macron is trying to persuade him to hang in there. But Macron's task got a lot tougher after Iran's foreign minister told CBS News that his country would restart its nuclear weapons program if the U.S. withdraws from the agreement.
They're not going to be restarting anything.
Obviously, the rest of the world cannot ask us to unilaterally and one-sidedly implement a deal that has already been broken.
They restart it, they're going to have big problems, bigger than they've ever had before.
Macron's argument is there's no peaceful alternative to the current agreement, and negotiations are making some progress on toughening the deal to allow clear verification that Iran is not developing nuclear weapons, all of which would be lost if the U.S. withdraws. When the discussion was concluded, President Trump indicated he still has an open mind on the subject, but offered only faint hope that he would stay in the Iran deal.
But there is a chance, and nobody knows what I'm going to do.
Serious issue discussions aside, much of the day was dedicated to pomp and ceremony, complete with marching bands on the White House lawn as the presidents and first ladies watched and waved. But the big hat notwithstanding, Melania has been more visible lately, attending the funeral of former First Lady Barbara Bush, last week hosting the Japanese Prime Minister and his wife at Mar-a-Lago.
I want to help children everywhere to be their best.
This month, she invited middle school students to the White House to talk about issues facing children. And the president's bromance seemed to be in full bloom, with hugs and cheek pecks and even wardrobe brush-offs.
In fact, I'll get that little piece of dandruff off.
There were plenty of friendly handshakes and admiration for one another.
I like him a lot.
Well, the first state dinner of the Trump administration also made news tonight, not only for the 123 people who attended, but also for who wasn't there. Politico first reported that no Democratic members of the House or Senate, including the party leaders, were invited to the dinner, and it appears that only one elected Democratic official, the governor of Louisiana, actually attended the dinner. And according to a Bloomberg poll report, only 9 cabinet secretaries were invited to the dinner. 15 others were not invited, including UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, EPA Secretary Scott Pruitt, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, and HUD Secretary Ben Carson, several of whom are in the president's doghouse or have come under fire for a variety of issues. Jeff, back to you.